I don't know what you think about revenge, but I've always believed that the best revenge is success. Not a fistfight, not screaming, not even a court case. Just taking your life and making it so that the person who betrayed you sees you at the top and realizes that you are infinitely better off without them. What I didn't know back then was that my revenge would last 2 full years, cost me nearly every penny I had, and make me forget who I really was at my core. But I did it. And now, sitting in the office that once belonged to my father, I understand. Every tear, every sleepless night, every lie I told. It was all justified, because I got back what was mine. Not through a court battle, not through a scandal, but through a quiet, cold, methodical infiltration of the company that was stolen from me. My name is Jessica. My last name used to be Black. My father founded Black Logistics 40 years ago. He started with one single truck and a warehouse on the outskirts of town. By the end of his life, he had 20 semis, a large warehouse, a downtown office, and 120 employees. He was immensely proud of what he built. He wanted to pass the business to me. I was his only daughter, and he always told me, "Jessica, you will be my heir. You're smarter than anyone I know. You'll make this company even greater." I believed him with all my heart. I studied economics, did internships, learned logistics inside and out. I was preparing to become his successor. But what I didn't know was that my uncle, my father's own brother, was preparing to become my enemy. Uncle Robert had always been envious. He believed that my father had cheated him out of their parents' inheritance. He thought the company should have gone to him because he was the older sibling. My father didn't want to fight, so he brought Robert on board, gave him the position of chief financial officer. That was his biggest mistake. Robert gained access to money, documents, seals, everything, and he used it all against us. I only found out about it after my father's death. On the day the lawyer read the will, my father died in March. Suddenly, a heart attack. His secretary called me at 7 in the morning. Her voice was trembling. I was living in Chicago at the time, and my father was in Cleveland. I got in my car immediately and started driving. The trip took 5 hours. 5 hours I spent in complete silence. I couldn't turn on the radio, I couldn't talk to anyone. I just stared at the road and remembered his face. How he smiled when I came to visit. How he hugged me and said, "Sweetheart, I missed you so much." How he taught me to drive a truck when I was 16. How proud he was when I graduated college with honors. I cried, but the tears flowed silently. I didn't want to believe he was gone. The funeral was 3 days later. I arrived in Cleveland and went straight to the morgue to say goodbye. He lay in the casket, so peaceful, so old. He was only 62. I held his hand and whispered, "Dad, I love you. I'll do everything to make you proud of me." I had no idea that in just a few days I would be fighting for everything he left me. There were many people at the funeral, employees, partners, old friends. They all came up to me, offered condolences, but I barely saw any of them. I only saw Uncle Robert. He stood by the casket, his hand on the lid, pretending to grieve. I knew he wasn't crying. He couldn't cry. He had always been jealous of my father. He hated his success. And now he stood there like a vulture, waiting for the moment to snatch his share. I approached him after the memorial service. "Uncle Robert, thank you for coming. Father would have appreciated it." He looked at me with his cold eyes and said, "He was my brother, Jessica. Of course I'm here, and I'll be here to help you with the business matters. You don't understand anything about business, after all." I smiled and said nothing, but inside I felt a chill. He spoke as if he had already decided something, as if he was already the master of the situation. A week after the funeral, my father's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, invited me to his office. He was an old family friend. I had known him since childhood. He looked embarrassed when he opened the folder. "Jessica," he said, "I have to inform you that according to your father's will, all shares of the company are transferred to your uncle, Robert. He left you only the house in the suburbs and a small amount in the bank account." I froze. I stared at him in disbelief. "But that's impossible," I said. "Father told me I would be the heir. He was preparing me for this. This has to be a mistake." Mr. Harrison shook his head. "The documents are signed by your father, notarized. They appear genuine." I asked for a copy. I took the papers and drove home. There, I read them until late into the night. Couldn't sleep. I reread every single line, and I noticed a strange detail. My father's signature looked like his, but not quite. The letter B in his last name was written slightly differently than he always wrote it. He had a distinct flourish and upward curve at the end. Here, that curve was missing. I realized the signature was forged. But who? Only one person had access to my father's documents: Uncle Robert. He was the CFO. He could get samples of the signature, practice, forge it. I was 100% certain of it. The next day, I went to my uncle. I said, "Robert, you forged my father's signature. I know it. I won't go to court if you give me back the company." He laughed. Cold, metallic laugh. "Jessica, my dear, you can't prove anything. I have the documents. I have the notary. You only have your suspicions. Go ahead and sue, but you'll lose. You don't have money for good lawyers. But I do." He was right. I had no money. My father left me the house and a small sum, but that wouldn't cover a lengthy legal battle. I knew my uncle would drag the case out, destroy evidence, bribe witnesses. I was alone, and I started thinking not like a victim but like a strategist. I decided not to sue. Instead, I decided to infiltrate his company. Under a false name, under a false identity. I wanted to gather evidence from the inside. Not just the forged signature, but the financial violations my uncle was surely committing. I knew his greed. He couldn't have just stolen the company. He must have been robbing it every single day. I wanted to find facts that would expose him not just as a thief, but as a fraudster. And I wanted to do it quietly, methodically, so that he wouldn't even suspect a thing. I spent a month preparing. I changed my name. I made documents in the name of Emily Brown. I bought a wig, glasses with plain lenses, changed my clothing style. I hid my bright personality under the guise of a modest, quiet girl from the provinces. I invented a story. I'd moved from a small town, looking for work, had experience in logistics, willing to work for modest pay. I called the HR department of Black Logistics and asked for an interview for the position of logistics assistant manager. It was a low-level job, but it gave me access to the office, to documents, to people. The interview went smoothly. The HR manager, a plump woman with tired eyes, looked at my resume and said, "You've moved around. You have limited experience, but you seem responsible. We'll take you on a trial basis." I signed the contract. A week later, I started working. I'll remember the first day forever. I walked into the office that had once been my second home. Employees walked the corridors, laughing, discussing projects. I walked among them, recognizing faces. Some I knew from my father, some I'd seen at the funeral. But they didn't recognize me. I had changed: the wig, the glasses, different makeup, different clothes, a different gait. I was unrecognizable. I felt like a spy. It was strange but exhilarating. My immediate supervisor was Mr. Stevens, an elderly man who had worked at the company for 20 years. He was kind but inattentive. He gave me access to shared folders, old reports, financial documents. I started digging. I looked for strange transfers, unusual contracts, suspicious signatures. 2 weeks in, I found the first violation. Uncle Robert had signed a contract with a transport company owned by his wife. The prices were inflated by double. The company was paying his wife for services that were worth half as much. It was a direct diversion of funds. I copied the contract, made extracts, saved everything on a flash drive. I kept searching. I found several more similar contracts. My uncle had created an entire network of shell companies through which he funneled money into his own accounts. He wasn't just a thief, he was a financial mastermind of fraud. But I needed more proof. I needed something that directly tied him to the forged will. I started looking for old documents. I knew he could have destroyed the originals, but the notary might have kept copies. I couldn't go to the notary because he might have been bribed, but I had access to the company's internal database. I found old scanned copies of documents that my uncle hadn't deleted. He was careless. Among them was correspondence with the notary where he asked to change the will. That was direct evidence of his crime. 3 months later, I got a promotion. My uncle noticed I was doing good work. He called me in for a talk and said, "Emily, you're very diligent. I'm offering you the position of assistant to the financial director. More responsibility, but also more pay. Are you interested?" I nodded. I wanted to work even closer to him. Now I could see his banking transactions, his correspondence, his meetings. I became a shadow that watched his every move. But I also became more vulnerable. He started asking questions. Emily, you know the company so well. It's as if you've worked here for 10 years. How do you know all the procedures? I replied, I took evening logistics courses, Mr. Black. I find it fascinating. He nodded, but I saw a glint of suspicion in his eyes. I couldn't afford a single mistake. One evening, when I was working late, an old employee, Mr. Clark, approached me. He had worked with my father from the very beginning. He gave me a strange look and said, You know, you look a lot like a certain woman, like the daughter of our founder, like Jessica. You have the same eyes and ears. My heart dropped. I smiled and said, That's just a coincidence. No one in my family is wealthy. He didn't press further, but I sensed he hadn't believed me. He started watching me. He checked my records, my actions. I realized time was running out. I had to act faster. I decided I would gather all the evidence and call a board meeting. The board members included people who had respected my father. They wouldn't cover for a fraudster. I started preparing a presentation. I included the contracts with shell companies, the forged will, proof of money transfers. I also included a copy of my uncle's correspondence with the notary. It was rock-solid evidence. I wasn't sure they would believe me if I just walked in and said, I'm Jessica. But I had documents. Documents were stronger than words. I sat in my tiny apartment, spreading papers across the table. The flash drive with the evidence was kept under my pillow, and I slept clutching it to my chest like a talisman. I knew that if my uncle found out who I was, he would stop at nothing. He could destroy the evidence, buy off witnesses, possibly even eliminate me. I wasn't naive. I understood I was playing with fire. But I also knew that if I backed down, I could never look myself in the mirror again. My father believed in me. He taught me to be brave. He said, Jessica, if you want something, go and take it, but not through force, through intelligence, through patience, through strategy. I was following his advice. I called an old friend of my father's who was on the board of directors. His name was Charles Morrison. He had been my father's business partner for 30 years. I knew he hated Uncle Robert. We met in a secret location, an old diner on the outskirts of town where no one could see us. I told him everything. I showed him copies of the documents. He read them and his face turned pale. My God, he said. I knew Robert was greedy, but I never thought he was capable of this. Forging your father's will, that's a serious crime. If you present this to the board, he will lose everything. I nodded. I know, and I'm going to do it. But I need your support, Charles. You have to convince the other board members to come to the meeting, and you have to be ready to stand against Robert. Charles shook my hand. Jessica, I'll do it for your father. For justice. Call the meeting. I'll be there. I sent out invitations on behalf of an unknown shareholder. I didn't give my name. I wrote that I had important documents regarding financial violations in the company. All board members agreed to attend. Uncle Robert, of course, was also invited. He didn't know who had summoned him. He thought it was some tax inspector. I decided to hold the meeting on a Friday evening, after all the employees had gone home. In the big conference room on the 5th floor. I arrived first. I set up the projector, prepared the presentation, laid out folders of documents. My heart was pounding like crazy as I stared at the empty chairs. 10 minutes later, board members started arriving. Charles Morrison came with 2 other directors. They all looked concerned. They didn't know I was Jessica. To them, I was Emily Brown, the modest assistant to the financial director. But I was about to change that. Finally, the door opened and Uncle Robert walked in. He was wearing an expensive suit, with his trademark smile on his face. He sat at the head of the table and said, So, who is this mysterious shareholder who wants to gather us all on a Friday evening? I stood up. I took off my glasses and swept my hair back. Everyone looked at me. Uncle Robert went pale. What the hell? He said. Emily? What are you doing? I smiled. My name is not Emily, Robert. My name is Jessica Black, your brother's daughter. The one you cheated. I pressed a button on the remote. The first slide appeared on the screen. My father's signature next to the forged will. Robert, you forged my father's signature. I have proof. The second page shows a comparison between the real signature and the forgery. You made a mistake in the flourish. Your hand is different from his. Robert jumped up. This is a lie. This is a setup. This girl is an imposter. Charles Morrison rose. Robert, sit down. You look guilty right now. I've known Jessica since she was a child. This is her. And your reaction says it all. I continued. I worked here for 10 months under a false name to gather this evidence. I have contracts with your wife, with your shell companies. You funneled money into your own accounts through them. I checked every single transfer. Over $2 million in the last 3 years. I found correspondence with the notary who agreed to change the will for money. It's all here in these folders. I handed folders to each board member. They started reading. Robert stood there, glaring at me with pure hatred. He tried to rush out of the room, but Charles blocked his path. Sit down, he said. You'll answer for all of this. Robert collapsed back into his chair. His face turned ashen. He knew he had lost. I walked up to him, leaned close and said quietly, so only he could hear, You thought I was weak. You thought I'd give up. You were wrong. Father raised me not to give up. He taught me to wait, to watch, to strike when no one expects it. Now you will pay. Not with money. I don't need your money. You'll pay with your freedom and your reputation, and with the fact that I'm about to call the police and give them your correspondence with the notary. This is a criminal case, Robert. You're going to prison. The board voted unanimously. Robert was terminated with immediate effect. He was banned from approaching the office. His accounts were frozen at my request. I became the interim CEO of the company. 2 months later, when the court declared the will invalid, I became the rightful owner of Black Logistics. Uncle Robert was arrested at his home 3 days after the board meeting. He was tried for fraud, document forgery, and embezzlement. He received 5 years in prison. I wasn't at the trial. I was in the office working on a new strategy for the company. Now I sit in my father's office. His old photographs lie in front of me. His diploma hangs on the wall. His favorite logistics books are in the cabinet. I haven't changed his office at all. I want him to be close. I want him to see what I did, that I reclaimed what belonged to him and to me, that I didn't give up, that I became a worthy heir. My uncle is now in prison. Sometimes I get letters from him. He asks for forgiveness. He writes that he was stupid, that he was jealous, that he wanted to be successful but didn't know how to be a good person. He writes that he regrets everything. I don't reply. I'm not angry at him. I just don't want to see him. He was my enemy, but he was also my teacher. He taught me something my father couldn't. How to be cautious, how to wait, how not to trust those who are unworthy of trust. Every enemy teaches you a lesson, and I received the greatest lesson of my life. I don't want you to think revenge is sweet. It's not sweet. It's hard. It's long. It leaves scars. But sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes, to protect what you hold dear, you have to become invisible, become someone else, sacrifice your own identity for a greater purpose. And I did that, and I have no regrets, because if I hadn't, I would have lived with the feeling that I had betrayed my father, that I had allowed a thief to steal his legacy, that I wasn't worthy of his love. Now I know I am worthy. I not only brought the business back, I doubled its profits in the first year. I restored the trust of our partners. I made the company better. I want my father to be proud of me. I want him to know his daughter didn't give up. She fought. She won. And she still loves him. If you've been through betrayal, don't lose hope. Sometimes silence and patience are your best allies. You don't need to scream about your pain. You need to act. Quietly, methodically, step by step. And one day you will triumph. Not because you're stronger, but because you're more honest. And honesty always wins in the end, even if it takes years. Subscribe to the channel if you also believe that truth must prevail. Share in the comments how you dealt with betrayal. It would mean a lot to me to know I'm not alone. Hit like if my story resonated with you. And remember, you are stronger than you think. Even when you're wearing a wig, using a false name, sitting in someone else's chair, you can still stay true to yourself. And you can still win. That was my path. Could be yours too. Bye for now.